Back as we turn to some significant news out of the Middle East. A senior Israeli official tells NBC News that President Biden's description of the latest ceasefire proposal is, quote, not accurate. The official specifically disputed that Israel has agreed to fully withdraw its troops from Gaza, a clause, the second phase of the proposal. The comment comes as far-right members of the Israeli government have voiced their opposition to the deal. President Biden announced the framework on Friday, describing it as a durable end to the conflict. The three-phase plan begins with a 6-week truce and the return of women, children, and other vulnerable hostages in exchange for the release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. Israeli troops would also withdraw from populated areas of Gaza. The second phase would see a permanent end to the war, as well as the release of the remaining hostages. The third phase outlines a 3 to 5 year period of reconstructing Gaza and the establishment of a non-Hamas Palestinian government. Hamas at this point has responded positively to the proposal, though not officially accepting it. Now the U.S. is urging both sides to indeed accept the terms.
Bro, it's so funny. It's like every time you hear American mainstream media, go, well, Hamas has said that they are looking favorably at this deal. I wonder why, because it's literally fucking identical to the deals that they've presented for months now. Okay? Anytime MSNBC says this and Israel turns around and goes, fuck no, we're not accepting this deal, and they have to report on it, that is a major blow to Israel's PR in the Western world. It is a major fucking blow. Okay? A ginormous blow. It's great. I personally think that Brandon kind of cooked it a little bit, thinking that they could get away with just being like, yeah, it's actually Hamas that doesn't want a ceasefire, guys, which is what they've been doing since fucking October 10th, okay? They have lied since October 10th, being like, we really, really, really want a cooperative agreement here, and we really want a ceasefire, but Hamas just keeps fucking it up, okay? They keep saying that over and over again, and I keep malding over and over again, but now it's getting to a point where, like, even the dumbest of Americans will look at this and go, what the fuck do you mean Hamas is not cooperating? I'm looking at MSNBC, and they say Hamas is actually looking positively at this deal. They've said it themselves. Why has this ceasefire deal been confusing? Because there is too much political pressure for unconditional support for Israel's genocide. And therefore, Brandon had to fucking come out and say something. And what he ended up saying was a miscalculation, I think. They most likely thought we could we could change political discourse once again by just simply lying and saying that, like, Hamas is not negotiating in good faith or negotiating at all. The real problem, or the real confusion, stems from the fine print of the deal. Israel, okay, here's how it works, okay? Kaya, out. Get out of there. Get out of there, lady. Wait, fuck. Okay. So here's what happened. Okay, here's what happened. Israel suggested a deal that looked aesthetically similar to the Hamas proposals so far to the American government. Okay? Biden then took the deal and bolded certain aspects of the deal that Israel had not agreed to or thought that Israel could like hide away in the fine print. Specifically, the hostage negotiations between phase 1 and phase 2 and the permanent ceasefire that comes in phase 2. The immediate ceasefire in phase 1 and the permanent ceasefire in phase 2. Israel thought that they could get away by being like, yeah, we'll do talks. We'll start the negotiations process and we'll do the best we can to well, we won't stop fighting. We won't stop bombing. But maybe we'll, I don't know, maybe we'll start considering whether we'll stop bombing or stop fighting. Biden took that deal and was like, great, say no more, fam. It's actually fucking permanent ceasefire. When you come out swinging with those statements, obviously the population is going to look at that and go, oh, thank God Biden is finally doing something, right? Especially because so many people no longer have the same appetite for death and destruction after 8 months of baby murder. So now we're at an impasse where Israel did actually fucking present a deal, but Biden kind of cooked it by bolding some of the key parts that that people actually only care about. People don't care about the minutia of how the hostage swap is going to happen. They care about a ceasefire more than anything else. So if Israel won't cooperate on that front, then all of a sudden they're cooked. Yes, Ryan Grimm's assessment on the issue is actually pretty solid. This summarization was pretty good. We covered it before. There's a lot of manufacturing confusion around these ceasefire proposals, but what happened is fairly simple. 529, Israel's war cabinet approves an offer for a ceasefire that was transmitted to Hamas. Netanyahu only agreed to it under extreme pressure and over opposition of Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who are not in the war cabinet. On 530, Hamas rejected it, saying no to talks unless Israel stopped its assault. Now, why did they do that? That was one of the few instances where Hamas said no to a deal that seemingly would have had ceasefire written all over it. The real reason why they did it, at least Ryan thinks, and I don't necessarily disagree with him, was because Hamas saw the amount of political pressure that Israel was receiving as a consequence of the Rafah tent massacre and knew that they could get more solidified terms on the ceasefire rather than some wishy-washy bullshit that Israel was presenting. On 531, Biden grabbed the Israeli proposal, which Netanyahu had been happy to see rejected by Hamas, and made it fully public, cleverly but accurately calling it the Israeli proposal, which it is. But Netanyahu hates it. So now Netanyahu is walking back from it while Hamas is responding positively. Now the mediators at U.S., Qatar, and Egypt are putting pressure on both Israel and Hamas to accept the deal. Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, the far-right members, say they'll leave the government if the deal happens. They'll leave Netanyahu to form a government with center-right figures. The proposal laid out by Biden, however, had a major issue for Israel, which was that it had the terms a complete ceasefire on phase 1 and had the term a permanent end to hostilities in phase 2. Benjamin Netanyahu thought that they could have cleverly written out a proposal where they could actually just act like they care about a permanent end to hostilities, when in fact they would not actually remove and withdraw their forces from populated areas in Gaza, by the way, which is bullshit. It should be a complete fucking retrieval, a complete removal of Israeli forces from Gaza. So that in and of itself causes the confusion. Biden came out and in fine print said these terms. Israel then went, whoa, hold up. We just kind of faked it. Like, we didn't mean it. What do you mean? Well, what the fuck's going on? And then here's Netanyahu subtly acknowledging he did make the proposal, but what he doesn't really mean it, but he doesn't really mean it because he'll keep waging the war no matter what. Note the language. The prime minister, and this is in English. It's important that this is in English. Okay? The prime minister authorized the negotiating team to present a proposal to that end, which would also enable Israel to continue the war until all of its objectives are achieved, including the destruction of Hamas's military and governing capabilities. Okay? But that's the issue. The issue is one side was negotiating in bad faith and personally thinking that they could continue with this narrative that they're doing their very best to put forward a ceasefire, but they made a mistake. And the mistake was to even mention a ceasefire at all. Now, I don't know if the actual text of the deal featured these words or if Brandon added those words, but it wouldn't be the first time an American envoy has added permanent ceasefire and an end to hostilities, as we heard from the prior iteration of this deal that Hamas had accepted, which Israel said they did not accept, actually, because maybe there was a third-party involvement in massaging the narrative on whether or not the Hamas, whether or not the Israeli proposal would feature a permanent end to hostilities and a ceasefire. That is, of course, what I believe, what I suspect was the American intervention in the matter, the CIA's intervention in the matter. So now the situation is even more cooked for Israel because people are no longer, like I said, have that same fucking smoke for Palestinian baby murder that they once did in the immediate aftermath of October 7. They're becoming more and more of a pariah state. America recognizes that and is trying to fix the situation. And they're trying to do we're doing what's good for you. But what if they were actually doing what's good for Israel, they would literally just, stop giving Israel weapons and tell them to, finally start listening to America. Meanwhile, all 4 hostages were kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th. Israeli army checking on whether or not they were killed by IDF fire in Han Yunis. I don't know if it's the same 4 hostages or if they fucking murked another 4 hostages. But this kind of shit makes the actions, makes this war less popular in Israel as well. Okay? Netanyahu refuses to show Smotrich and Ben-Gvir the 4.5-page Israeli offer that was approved by the war cabinet, which Biden referred to in his speech. This has led outrage from both ministers. Ben-Gvir said, Mr. Prime Minister, what have you got to hide? If the deal is not reckless and it includes a clause on the destruction of Hamas, why won't you show it to me? The reason can only be one. This is a draft of a reckless proposal as presented by Biden, and now you're trying to legitimize it. Meanwhile, Smotrich called the wartime cabinet decision illegitimate and contrary to the law. This is also interesting because Ben-Gvir came out today and said he had no idea about the specific details of this deal before Biden's speech. It's been widely reported that its details were not shown to the National Security Cabinet. We're literally reading that right now. They only got a vague outline. In fear of leaks, supposedly. Take his word with a grain of salt, obviously, but Ryan saying Ben-Gvir and Smotrich opposed it is interesting. No, Ryan saying Ben-Gvir and Smotrich opposed it is they're saying publicly that they are not in support of any kind of deal that Biden has presented that has the word ceasefire, that doesn't feature a permanent end and dismantling of Hamas's military and political power in the Strip. They did publicly say that. Doesn't matter. They didn't have to read the fine print at all. They are seeing exactly what we are all seeing all around the world, which is ceasefire and permanent end to hostilities being fucking, broadly celebrated and talked about on those terms, on no uncertainty, under no uncertainty. Now, of course, the issue for the Brandon administration is they keep saying, oh no, this is Israel's deal and Hamas has to accept it over and over again. Meanwhile, Israel's like, we don't accept it. Fuck you. And I think there's only so much inconsistency that the media can continue with. Because people already heard the words come out of his mouth. And it's too late to put the toothpaste back in the fucking tube.
Terms, while cautioning that more negotiations will need to take place, especially when it comes to moving to phase 2, the permanent ceasefire.
All this progress would make Israel more secure, with Israeli families no longer living in the shadow of a terrorist attack. And all this would create the conditions for a different future, a better future for the Palestinian people. One of self-determination, dignity, security, and freedom. This path is available once the deal is struck. For months, people all over the world have called for ceasefire. Now it's time to raise your voices and demand that Hamas come to the table, agrees to this deal, and end this war that they began. Of course, there'll be differences on the specific details that need to be worked out. That's natural. If Hamas comes to negotiate, ready to deal, then Israel negotiations must be given a mandate, the necessary flexibility to close that deal.
Joining us now, retired CIA officer Mark Palmeropoulos. He's an NBC News security and intelligence analyst. Mark, good morning. Thanks for joining us. So let's get your reaction to this breaking news from a senior Israeli official who says that the president does not quite have the details correct of this proposal, particularly on the idea of moving troops out of Gaza. Do you think, from what we know of this deal, do we think that both sides will eventually take it?
Well, Jonathan, good morning. And I think, President Biden, that was a masterful play on a Friday night speech. Particularly, this is the Sabbath in Israel when some of the more, hardline members of the...
This part is so funny that they just keep going. Biden used the weakness. Expert play, masterful gambit, sir. He played the Sabbath card.
coalition do not have access to media. And he put forth a plan, which in essence was the Israeli plan. Now, there's going to be some back and forth on this. And, you got to remember, Henry Kissinger once said, Israel has no foreign policy. They only have domestic politics. And in some sense, Biden's move was a reflection of that. But at the end, there might be some back and forth. You also have some Israeli officials over the last several days saying, no, actually, this was what the Israeli negotiating team did put forth. Don't forget that the Israeli negotiating team, along with the war cabinet, was aware of this proposal, but the entire cabinet and Israeli population were not. So lots of moving parts. I think that ultimately the two sides could get together. We've been optimistic before. The last piece on this, and I'll throw this out there, I'm not entirely sure that Bibi Netanyahu has what it takes to do this, but he has a visit to Washington within 8 weeks. There's arrest warrants out for him, but there's a chance for him to kind of reshape his legacy. Will he take this? It really remains to be seen. One tries to be optimistic. At the end of the day,
It's kind of crazy that this is a fucking CIA guy and he's wrong. He doesn't have arrest warrants out. There's an application for an arrest warrant. I don't think it came down yet. But like that's a wild mistake to make on MSNBC as like the fucking CIA guy. Anyway. Like I said, though, it would be cool to follow the letter of the law and show a firm commitment. I would like to see a firm commitment by the United States of America to the rule-based international order. I demand the arrest of this war criminal whose hopefully his application for his arrest warrant will go through, and America will, in an effort of good faith, arrest this man.
There's no other plan B. So again, a masterful move by the Biden administration. let's see what happens next. Let's see actually if Hamas can accept this as well.
Yeah, we'll come back to Hamas in a moment, but staying with President Biden and Netanyahu, it did seem like the president was trying to box in the prime minister here a little bit. We know Netanyahu's taking a lot of pressure from the far-right part of his coalition to not take this deal. And he's certainly got one eye at all times fixed on his own political future.
I don't get it. Isn't this the Israeli deal? Should mainstream media not be asking that question more? Be like, why aren't they recognizing their own deal? Didn't Biden present this as the Israeli deal that Hamas must accept? Kind of confusing. That's the best part about this, though, is that Brandon used the term ceasefire, recognized that it is international pressure at play. He said the entire world is looking for a ceasefire. Now it's time for you to put pressure on your government. And a permanent end to hostilities. It's over. You took the fucking toothpaste out of the tube, baby. Israel thought that they could get away with the ambiguity in terms of the hostage negotiations between phase 1 and phase 2. Now, obviously, the part of the problem here, the reason why, like, while it is a good thing that Brandon said this, the reason why I think it was a fuck up for him, the reason why I think it's a fuck up for him personally is because, like, I don't think he, I think he miscalculated what Israel would do. And I think this is going to make him look weaker if Israel continues to do Israel shit. And the rest of America and the rest of the world look to what Brandon said and the lack of enforcement on the Brandon side against Israel when Israel keeps doing Israel shit. That's just going to make him look really fucking bad.
So tell us a little bit more here about the dilemma that Netanyahu faces.
So he has the more extreme members of his coalition who are now threatening to withdraw from the government if the deal collapses. That's Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. One of the interesting things will be if does the Israeli opposition actually come to the rescue of Netanyahu. It says if he does take this deal, they'll keep the government afloat only for a short period of time. Kind of lots of moving parts here. But again, there's a fundamental disconnect between some of Netanyahu's numerous statements about finishing Hamas off entirely versus what his negotiating team put forward. Does he do something that is historic but risk his own political survival? And I think these are his calculations. Never underestimate him. A lot of us can criticize Netanyahu for good reason, but he is frankly a survivor. And so in the next several days, we'll kind of go forward. One idea, of course, is that he actually okayed this proposal knowing that Hamas or expecting that Hamas would reject it as well. So lots of moving parts. Netanyahu's legacy is on the line. And again, don't forget, this is in the backdrop of a visit to the United States and an address of Congress in the next 8 weeks, which will be, have really profound effects both here in the United States and abroad as well.
Unclear if Netanyahu will also get a White House invite when he is in Washington later this summer. So, Mark, tell us about, is there a sense that Hamas will indeed reject this? Address that, and then also just give us the latest as to what Israelis' moves in Rafah might be. Tanks spotted in the center of town.
Right. So, I think a lot of this, when we discuss this proposal, kind of fails to address the notion of would Hamas accept this deal as well, because there's parts of this where it's unclear if this would be an actual full cessation of hostilities. And don't forget that the Biden administration has also, in essence, given a green light for Israel to go forward with the elimination of, Hamas senior leaders. That's a whole separate kind of intelligence, kinetic campaign. That Hamas is going to be under incredible pressure from the Qataris. I think what the U.S. is really counting on is for both Qatar and Egypt to bring Hamas to the table on this. But again, Yahya Sinwar, who in essence is calling the shots, he's deep underground somewhere in a tunnel in Gaza. What does his legacy, want to be? Is he willing to actually call an end to the war as well? So, we shall see. Finally, on Rafah, you have the Israelis, the Americans, and the Egyptians, the Qataris as well, meeting on this. One of the things that we, certainly the Egyptians want to see is for Rafah to reopen. But I think a lot of this has to do if Israel and Hamas can come to a deal.
Yeah, a very delicate moment in this conflict. We, of course, will stay on every single detail. We appreciate the insights this morning from retired CIA officer Mark Polymeropoulos. Mark, thank you again.
This news is funded by viewers like you. Please support us.
This is actually a really good video. If it's the one I think it is this with David Levy? Yeah, it is. Okay, we'll watch this. I listened to this morning.
First phase would last for 6 weeks.
Anyway, we're skipping the intro.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has not yet publicly backed it. One of his aides said Israel's agreed to the framework of the deal, but no official announcement has been made. Two far-right members of the Israeli government, the Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, have threatened to leave Netanyahu's government if he supports the truce proposal. On Saturday, tens of thousands of Israelis, led by relatives.
Channel 11 poll yesterday from our Israeli chatter. Only 38% of voters favor Gantz as prime minister, down from 46%, while 30% favor Bibi, up from 24%. Meanwhile, Likud is stable at 21 to 22 mandates, whereas Gantz is down to 25 to 27, down from a high of 41. The opposition polls at about 69 seats, with 61 needed for a coalition. But it's too divided in such a way that it couldn't form a government either. Why in the ever-living fuck would Bibi destroy his career just when he's bouncing back?
Of hostages took part in protests calling on Netanyahu not to sabotage the ceasefire deal. On Sunday,
I think one of the wildest aspects of what Time Without an Ovo is mentioning here is the fact that Benjamin motherfucking Netanyahu's popularity is seemingly bouncing back with every new dead Palestinian child. Israelis are like, you know what? This guy is our guy, actually. Okay? It is fucking insane. Actually,
families of hostages protested outside Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office in Jerusalem and urged him to accept President Biden's peace deal. This is Shay Dickman, whose cousin.
Like, the more he's fucking up, the more there's like new reporting on, his spokesperson being like telling the fucking hostage families and their negotiators that like, you can suck my dick. We're going to kill all of them or whatever, any number of different things. The more the Israeli society broadly is like, you know what? This is our guy, actually. Yeah, you're right. Hostage families should suck our dicks.
Is an Israeli hostage in Gaza.
I'm here to support my government in taking this deal, the deal that Netanyahu suggested, our prime minister, that will get all our people back home. We are all here in support for the return of all hostages.
Meanwhile, U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer have invited Netanyahu to address a joint session of Congress. Senator Bernie Sanders slammed the idea of inviting Netanyahu at a time when the International Criminal Court is seeking his arrest for war crimes. For more, we go to London, where we're joined by Daniel Levy, president of the U.S. Middle East Project, former Israel.
Remember when I said early in October, Israel was using the hostages cynically as a broad mandate to genocide Palestinians? And people were like, wow, Hasan, how anti-Semitic of you. Remember all the other commentators that were chirping at me back then? I ask you to revisit some of my early October commentary. My conversations that I had with many people, even those who I disagree with, and try to understand where I was coming from and how correct I was even back then in comparison to where we're now and what the broader public sentiment is now.
Peace negotiator under Prime Ministers Ehud Barak and Yitzhak Rabin.
I wrote about this in university, and my professor loved it. He couldn't believe what I was writing, but little did he know I was plagiarizing you. Bro, don't admit that. What if your professor is a Hasanabi head?
Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Daniel. If you can start off by laying out what this plan is, the significance of President Biden presenting this plan, and where Netanyahu and Hamas stand on it.
Thank you for having me back, Amy. This is significant because it's not something you can do, every week for the President of the United States to say, here's the plan. I don't think he's done it at the most propitious moment. I don't know why he's waited this long. But there you have it. He has set out this plan. What he set out was various phases. It's not something particularly new. I think the crucial ingredients were that President Biden seemed to suggest that this is a package which is a permanent, sustainable ceasefire in the context of the current hostilities. That was a crucial missing ingredient. The other thing was he suggested that this is an Israeli proposal. Curiously, he then went on, considering he said this was an Israeli proposal, he then went on to outline why this was so advantageous to Israel and why, therefore, Israelis should accept their own proposal. Now, Amy, I'm a strong believer that there is sometimes a place for constructive ambiguity in order to advance something, and sometimes one needs a bit of poetic license. In other words, where he gave the Israeli victory narrative, I don't think that was an accurate reflection of reality, the balance of forces, the balance of power, but if that's what will get us to an end to these horrors, so be it. That's Friday night. We then have an initial Hamas response, which talks about this being positive and constructive. We have Egypt's foreign minister today visiting Spain, telling us that Hamas has viewed this positively. I think for Hamas, what they have suggested is the key is making clear that indeed this is the on-ramp to a permanent ceasefire. We had a couple of strange tweets from the Israeli prime minister over the weekend in which he suggested, well, we've got our own.
I love that his cadence is like mirroring mine as well when talking about how curious the nature of the Israeli proposal is and how it is in direct juxtaposition with how curiously Israel is now saying that they are not in support of their own proposal. How odd. I'm noticing a direct juxtaposition here with what the fuck Israel is saying about their own proposal and what they're doing so far. It's just very odd. I don't know. I can't for the life of me put my finger on it. It's awesome.
Conditions. And then you had not only the ministers you've referred to, Amy, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, but much of Netanyahu's own Likud party unequivocally rejecting the deal. And just now, appearing before the Israeli Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, Prime Minister Netanyahu, because I think this is important, said the following: the deal will not stop the war, will not stop the fighting. It will bring a temporary ceasefire for 42 days to get the hostages out. This directly contradicts, should he stand by his word, what President Biden said. And so the question now is, do you allow constructive ambiguity, Netanyahu having forcefully rejected this, do you allow that to become duplicity and dishonesty, or do you act differently? The ball is back in President Biden's court.
So talk about Hamas's response as well. And again, to be clear, what we understand at this point, the first stage proposes a 6-week ceasefire during which the Israeli army would withdraw from the populated area of Gaza. Hostages, including the elderly and women, would be exchanged for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. Civilians would also return to all of Gaza. 600 trucks carrying humanitarian aid flooding the enclave daily. And then going on to the second phase, where Hamas and Israel would negotiate terms for a permanent end of hostilities. And also, even if Smotrich and Ben Gvir, who was not only charged with but convicted of terrorism and supporting a terrorist group. And
I want to reiterate something here, something that my girl Amy's about to mention. I know many of you prior to October 7 had probably heard me talk about Itamar Ben Gvir, whether it be in 2021, but certainly in the judicial reforms that were going to take place in Israel. And at that time, I reiterated something to you that is a matter of the record. It's a part of Israeli law that Itamar Ben Gvir was too nutty and too anti-Palestinian for the Israeli Defense Force. Now, at the time, you probably just kind of listened to it and went, huh? But now that you understand how fucking right-wing the Israeli government and Israeli society is when it comes to Palestinian murder, now reimagine how unimaginably insane it is that the motherfucking Israeli government was like, yeah, dog, you're a little bit too invested. Because maybe you didn't understand how fucking deep that well of hatred went pre-October 7, but 8 months after, I think you understand how the broader Israeli society views the actions that have taken place. So now think about how fucking unimaginably insane Ben Gvir is, that at a certain point, the Israeli government was like, yeah, dude, you're, you know, like, we all want to kill Palestinians, but you want to maybe kill them a little too much. Yeah, it's like David Duke applying for the NYPD. Exactly.
Inciting anti-Palestinian hatred. Even if they were to leave the government, that doesn't necessarily mean that the survivor, Netanyahu, would fall, which has often been said, right? If the other parties came to his support.
Right, so that's a lot to unpack. Let's start where you started with the details of the plan. By the way, the plan has apparently been kept from the Israeli cabinet, not the war cabinet, but the broader cabinet in which the individuals you mentioned sit. Interesting in and of itself. That plan, there are the details that you mentioned. What exactly will be the parameters of the IDF withdrawing from population centers? Can we actually get the humanitarian assistance in this time? We've had all these fantastical ideas, a seaport, airdrops. Why did we need to engage in these failed efforts? We knew they would fail because Israel has closed off the land crossings, which is how you get normally the humanitarian assistance, the necessary basics into Gaza. That's one of the reasons that the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has asked the court to issue an arrest warrant against Netanyahu and Gallant on the Israeli side because of the use of starvation as a weapon of war. So you've got what are the details around getting the humanitarian assistance in? What are the details of Palestinian prisoners to be released alongside those Israelis being held in Gaza? That already is a lot that could unravel. But what is, I think, even more crucial is what are the maximal guarantees that can be given that this is not just a 42-day hiatus followed by yet further death, killing, destruction that we still now see every day, mass civilian killing events. And that is where I think the heightened tension exists between what appears to be, needs to be put to the test, the position of President Biden and the now clearly articulated position of the Israeli government. So I think that is where the focus is for the Hamas party, because their position, relatively clear and consistent, has been full Israeli withdrawal and full end to the fighting. Now, what exactly is the Hamas response? Well, here we have an internal Hamas leadership. Quite difficult for that communication to take place, as you and your listeners can imagine, given the nature of the warfare, the tunnels where people are located. You have a leadership in exile. And so teasing out the final answer might take time. But what Hamas seems to have said is, we want a clear understanding of what is the commitment that phase one leads to phase two, and it can't end at the end of phase one. On the Netanyahu side, he now has an equation to deal with. As you say, he could conceivably have a majority in parliament because Gantz's party and Lapid's party have both said they will provide a safety net for Netanyahu if he takes the deal, and that gives him the numbers. However, and let's be clear, Gantz and Lapid have supported this war throughout. They've had no qualms about any of the violations.
Yeah. The problem with that coalition is that it is like the most Israeli coalition, which means it's destined to fucking fail again. Like, those dudes are salivating at the prospect of fucking dismantling Netanyahu. So for him, it's like, yeah, okay, they protect me now, but tomorrow I'm cooked. Because Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid are both anti-Netanyahu. You know what I mean?
Of international law that is committed, just so we correctly characterize those folks. But they have said they will offer a safety net for this deal, and that's important. However, that makes Netanyahu dependent on people who want to bring him down, who want him out of power, as well they should as the leaders, putatively, of the opposition. Therefore, if he wants governmental stability, he needs to stick with the original.
And they're both anti-Palestine? Yeah, except that is even a further problem for Benjamin Netanyahu. At least if one of them was like somewhat kind of pro-Palestine, he could easily posture against them and be like, these guys are not a better alternative. They love Arabs. I don't. Meanwhile, they are also just as rabidly anti-Palestinian. There's a reason why Benny Gantz, who's America's guy, by the way, for replacing Netanyahu, straight up ran saying, I'm the real war criminal, not Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm a general. I did war crimes. Look at my fucking war crimes. You have to vote for me. If you think I'm joking, I'm not, okay? That's a bad campaign? No, in Israel, that's not a bad campaign. Israeli politics only goes to the right. That's it. How is he America's guy, by the way? You've said that a few times without explaining it. Benny Gantz was invited to the White House a couple months ago. And America obviously is looking at this with a broader long-term plan, and they see Benny Gantz and like liberal Zionism or some aspect of some form of liberal Zionism as like the only way that Israel can continue maintaining its apartheid regime. So they think Benny Gantz is more manageable. He's not like outwardly right-wing. He's not as corrupt. Netanyahu's own Likud party leaders are firmly opposing Biden's Israel ceasefire proposal, threatening to collapse the government if Bibi agrees to it. It's not just the far-right extremists like Ben Gvir and Smotrich. His entire government is far-right lunatic. It's true. Why is this community so hostile? Like, people like me get timed out for no reason? Hey, yo, is that a strategy to make your stream boring? I just ask you, could you watch whatever, but you choose to watch this no one cares video? Don't ban me hard. Can't the chatters watch something fun for once? Don't ban me. We not all debate lord, okay? Most people here watch you for your content, okay? I think this has got to be the same guy, right? There's this one guy that comes in here and is always like, hey man, can you please stop covering politics? Don't ban this guy. I want to watch this space. I want to see what else he comes up with. But yeah, you got timed out because you were fucking annoying. Because you were fucking annoying, dude. Demanding that I change the motherfucking channel. Like, who the fuck are you? What are we talking about here? There's 24,000 people in here who are literally like, hey, listen, we really like this and we really appreciate this coverage. Meanwhile, this one guy is like, actually, can you not do this?
Coalition that he formed that was in power until October 7th, that continues to be in power, which includes his own party, many of whom have opposed this deal, and which includes these characters from the extreme right, alongside his own extremists, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. And Netanyahu, therefore, this is the crucial thing, Amy. He therefore looks at the proposal and says, is it more risky politically for me to say no to Biden or to say no to Ben-Gvir and Smotrich? And that is why I suggest to you that the question is for President Biden, does he up the ante and make the cost of saying no greater, or does he allow Netanyahu to stare him down? And then Biden has the choice. I can throw more goodies at the Israelis. You know, the congressional invitation, that's a goodie for Netanyahu. It's not just the Republican leadership. It's Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries signed on that letter of invitation. Do I try and package something more around this Saudi deal that is clearly not budging Israeli internal politics? What more goodies can I throw? That's not going to work. It's failed. It's not our first rodeo when Netanyahu undermines and goes ahead and does what he wants.
By the way, this is why I said earlier that it's a fucking failure. Like, I mean, we'll see what happens, but ultimately, this is why I think it's fucking so stupid to let this goddamn criminal come here and not actually start using the stick. America's been using the carrot for far too long. America has been using the carrot for far too long against Israel, and they have to fucking use the stick. What? Why you speak for everybody? No one said that. Your bubble's going to agree with you, but you are wrong on this one. Sorry, but the chat room is for people who speak. Why hate on people who speak? What? I'm not him, and maybe you are annoying as well. What? Bro, I'm a political commentator covering fucking one of the more important issues of our time. Just rewind your brain what you told. Yeah, I mean, it is ESL. It is a sock account. Stick around, chatter. You'll learn a few things.
And stares down the American president. His other choice is to say, you know what, just as I kind of did in my speech, I'll blame Hamas. Then I can say to my American voting public, I tried, it was Hamas's fault. Maybe it will work. I suggest people who are following this closely will find it hard to see that as credible. Or he can up the ante and actually, rather than have Netanyahu win this standoff, escalate the cost to Netanyahu, to the Israeli security establishment, to the Israeli public and the Israeli voting system of continuing with this war, continuing with the violations and war crimes that are being committed.
What about implementation? I mean, we saw what happened. The ICC responds to the emergency request of South Africa and says, yes, Israel must pull out of Rafah. And the next day, Israel bombs this tent city, kills 45 people, injures well over 100, charred bodies everywhere. How does this get implemented?
Yes, indeed. The court's decisions are not self-implementing. It was the International Court of Justice that called for the provisional measures on 2 occasions now. The International Criminal Court has requested the issuing of arrest warrants on both the Hamas and the Israeli side. In the absence of the ability for these decisions to be self-implementing, It rests on third-party actors to try and make it costly not to implement those. Now, the US is very well versed in how do you make it costly for a party not to implement. That sometimes works and it sometimes doesn't work. But it means that you align with the decision of the International Court. And I think the American voting public, some of whom, perhaps many of whom, care about this issue, deserve to know. Does a president seeking re-election, who is apparently standing on a platform that I respect law, does he also respect international law? Because his reactions to the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court have been criminally dismissive. And therefore, if Israel's most important ally, if the party providing the weaponry without which none of this would have been possible, including the latest horrors of Palestinians going to so-called safe zones, which are nothing of the sort, if that party is ready to dismiss and not abide by international law, that's important to know. It may well be in violation of US law in doing this as well. And does the American president, therefore, want to bring this to a close? Because if he does, then rather than in a mealy-mouthed way in a CNN interview saying, well, I'm reviewing one transfer of weapons, he would actually make this costly, whether that's the weaponry, whether that's other parties taking steps that America doesn't oppose. Look, there's the Olympics next month, in a couple of months. Israelis care about things as long as it's just rhetoric. As long as Israelis don't see a tangible cost, then I think it will be very difficult to budge the equation where Netanyahu says, I can win this, I can carry on, I will get away with it, and the US will continue to run cover for me.
You are a former Israeli peace negotiator. What do you see happening as we wrap up this discussion at this point? The fact that speaking from a podium, President Biden laid this out, this plan, and suggested that Israel was supporting it, and Hamas said they were open to it. How serious is this?
The president has to prove its seriousness. I don't dismiss that it was important that he set this plan out, because he's kind of now put in a transparent way. This is the option. If you want to get your hostages out, there are good reasons for Israel to take this deal. Israel may not be exhausted, but it's overextended, and there are elements of exhaustion. There are less and less hostages alive if you want to see them home living. That's why many of the hostages' families are out on the streets screaming. If you don't want these international actions to continue, then there is a path forward here. However, if the Israeli decision, as it currently seems to be, that this war should continue, their military objectives are not going to be realized. They have not been realized. Hamas will not be vanquished in the way that Netanyahu suggests. The Palestinians cannot be defeated militarily. Some of the fantasy day after plans are precisely that. They are magical, not realist thinking. But if you want that equation to change, then, as the leading Israeli columnist Nahum Barnea has said in a column today, he has said there will have to be internal and external pressure to change that equation. So I fear that initially what we are already seeing is that Netanyahu will try and get away with poo-pooing the American president's plan and trying to have the blame placed on Hamas. Will the US go along with this? That's not a question for Netanyahu. That's a question for the administration. The chance that we actually see an end to these horrors is if it's too costly for Netanyahu to continue. We are not there yet. I'm not suggesting Hamas will be an easy negotiating partner, but their position has been quite clear and consistent, and their initial reaction to the Biden plan has followed suit.
That's it. He's literally taken the long way to say that it is entirely in the hands of Biden, now that he put this out there like a fucking bomb, to actually enforce it. Because if he thinks he can get away with just simply claiming that at the top of the hour there isn't a 3-minute ad break, when there obviously is one, and especially if he doesn't offer gifted subs to every single person so they don't see the top of the hour ad break, you're going to see the top of the hour ad break inevitably. Okay? chatters can't be the only ones who constantly do that. Okay? Chatters cheer on ad break debates. It's 6 minutes early. Bibi does smear Gantz and Lapida's pro-Palestinian. The Gantz wants a Palestine state campaign really kicked in full force back in November. Never directly, but rather through his personal outlets like Channel 14 and Israel Hayom. It would kill him to sit with the same people he's smeared endlessly for years. Meanwhile, Netanyahu's future is inextricably dependent on Ben Gvir, polling at 10 seats right now, who's been chipping at his right flank anyway. It's an easy calculation for Bibi. I was eating up what you were saying. How dare you betray my trust? Yeah, well, don't eat this top of the hour ad break, though. At least don't eat it. Don't take it lying down. Okay. You can subscribe for $5 or for free with the Twitch Prime and or get gifted a sub and avoid the top of the hour ad break. Here it is. Anyway, what I was trying to fucking say ultimately was that Biden fucking thought, perhaps as a miscalculation, that if he drops this bomb of like ceasefire and drops this bomb of permanent end to hostilities, he thought he could get away with it by being like, Hamas is not playing around, Jack. And they'll keep repeating that till the fucking cows come home. But Israel, doing the most Israel shit, is consistently repeating like, no, dog, this deal ain't ours. Even if it's ours, we don't want it anymore. We just want to kill Palestinians. Fuck you. Why would an expert elderly statesman who has been doing this for fucking 700 years, who's been alive for longer than the Israeli nation state has been alive, why would that guy ever think Israel would do something different now? Without penalties, without not just like calls for restraint, but actual repercussions for Israel.